The bank called again, Aunt Margaret. I gripped my phone tightly, pacing my kitchen floor. They said there hasn't been a payment in 3 months. That's not what you told me last week. Oh, sweetie, don't worry so much. You know how banks are, always making mountains out of molehills. My aunt's breezy tone made my stomach clench. I'll sort it out next week when that big catering order comes through. My name is Emily, and at 29, I was watching my perfect credit score crumble because I'd made the mistake of trusting family. 8 months ago, my Aunt Margaret had swept into my life with dreams of opening a bakery, complete with Pinterest boards and promises of becoming the next great success story in our small town. You're the only one who really understands business, Emily, she'd said over coffee that day, spreading out her elaborate plans. The banks just don't see the vision. But you do, don't you? You've always been the smart one in the family. Now, standing in my kitchen surrounded by past due notices, those words felt less like praise and more like calculated manipulation. That catering order fell through weeks ago, I said. The client told me himself when I ran into him at the grocery store. Why are you lying to me? The silence on the other end lasted just a beat too long. Well, there are other orders coming, and anyway, didn't you say you got a bonus at work? Maybe you could help out just this once. No. My voice shook. That's not what co-signing means, Aunt Margaret. You promised you'd handle the payments. You showed me a business plan. You swore you'd be responsible. I am being responsible. Do you know how hard it is running a business? Of course there are going to be some bumps along the way. I thought you'd understand that, being an accountant. I walked to my home office, pulling up the online banking app I'd finally convinced her to let me access. What I saw made my blood run cold. Are the Louis Vuitton charges part of those bumps, Aunt Margaret? Or the 3-day spa retreat? Because I'm looking at the business account right now, and there's an awful lot of personal spending here. Those were networking opportunities. You have to spend money to make money, Emily. Honestly, for someone so smart, you can be very small-minded about business. I stared at the screen, at the long list of expenditures that had nothing to do with running a bakery. All while I'd been getting increasingly panicked calls from the bank about missed loan payments. The signs had been there from the beginning, if I'd only let myself see them. When Aunt Margaret first approached me with her bakery plan, she'd spun a perfect story. She'd already found the perfect location, she said. She had recipes passed down from my grandmother. She'd even taken some business classes at the community college. What she didn't mention was that 3 other banks had already turned her down, or that her business classes consisted of one weekend seminar, or that her previous attempts at running businesses, the jewelry-making venture, the life coaching practice, the essential oils phase, had all ended in debt and disappointment. But I'd wanted to believe her. Growing up, Aunt Margaret had been the fun one, always full of exciting ideas and dreams. While my own mother preached practicality and careful planning, Aunt Margaret talked about following your passion. She'd praised my decision to become an accountant, unlike my mother who worried it was too boring for me. Just look at these projections, she'd said, showing me spreadsheets that I now realized were wildly optimistic. We could be the next big thing in town, and with your financial expertise backing me, how could we fail? I pulled up those original projections now, comparing them to the reality. The bakery was hemorrhaging money. Customer reviews complained about inconsistent hours and unfulfilled orders. Meanwhile, Aunt Margaret's social media showed her at expensive restaurants, shopping trips, spa days, all paid for with business funds. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Sarah. Have you talked to Mom lately? She's telling everyone you pressured her into taking that loan, says you insisted on co-signing because you wanted to control her business. I nearly dropped my phone. Me? Pressure her? I remembered how she'd shown up at my house 3 times in 1 week, how she'd called crying about her dreams being crushed, how she'd told me I was her only hope. Another text from Sarah. She's really playing up the victim angle. Says you're threatening her now, being a ruthless businesswoman instead of family. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not just the lying, not just the misused money, but this deliberate twisting of the truth. Aunt Margaret was trying to destroy my reputation to save her own. I looked around my home office at the careful order I maintained in my life. My color-coded files, my organized desk, my clear plans for the future, all of it now threatened by my aunt's chaos and lies. I spent that evening documenting everything. Every email where Aunt Margaret had begged me to co-sign, every promise of responsible management, every bank notice about missed payments. I downloaded statements showing her personal purchases with business funds, designer clothes, spa treatments, weekend getaways that had nothing to do with running a bakery. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. She hadn't been paying vendors either. Local suppliers had stopped delivering because of bounced checks. The rent on the bakery space was 2 months behind. She'd even taken out additional credit cards in the business's name, maxing them out on personal expenses. My cousin Sarah kept forwarding me messages from family members. Poor Margaret, Emily's being so harsh about a few late payments. She's always been a bit cold about money matters. Family should help family without all these demands. The last one made me laugh bitterly. Family should help family. Isn't that exactly what I'd done? I'd put my own financial future on the line to help Aunt Margaret's dream. And how had she repaid that trust? My phone rang. My mother this time. "Emily, honey, maybe you could be a little more understanding," she started. "Your aunt's always been more of a creative spirit. She's not good with numbers like you are." "She's good enough with numbers to hide her personal shopping and the business expenses," I replied, "and good enough to know exactly how to play the victim when she gets caught." "She says you've been threatening her with lawyers," said. "I haven't said anything about lawyers yet, Mom, but maybe I should." The silence on the other end was heavy. "Yet? Emily, you can't be serious. She's family." "Yes, she is, which makes her betrayal even worse." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and started researching business loan liability and fraud. The more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about missed payments anymore. What Aunt Margaret was doing was illegal. Using business loans for personal expenses, lying to creditors, potentially committing credit card fraud. I'd spent my whole career building a reputation for integrity and financial responsibility. I wouldn't let her destroy that. Not with her lies, not with her manipulation, not with her creative spirit excuse. My hands shook as I drafted an email to a lawyer my firm often worked with. This would change everything. My relationship with Aunt Margaret, my standing in the family, the comfortable fiction we'd all maintained about her entrepreneurial spirit. But as I looked at the mounting evidence of her deception, I knew I had no choice. Sometimes protecting yourself means being the bad guy in someone else's story. Part 2, Segment 1, 500 words. The meeting with the lawyer confirmed my worst fears. Not only was I liable for the loan payments, but Aunt Margaret's misuse of business funds could potentially lead to criminal charges. The lawyer laid out my options, none of them pleasant. "First, we send a formal demand letter," she explained. "We detail the misuse of funds and give her 30 days to begin repayment. If she doesn't comply, we can file for a civil suit and report the credit card fraud to the authorities." "Will that protect me from the loan liability?" "It can help. If we can prove she deliberately misled you and misused the funds, we might be able to get your name removed from the loan. But it won't be easy. Or quiet." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another family message. Aunt Margaret had posted a long social media update about betrayal and family members who care more about money than relationships. She didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. I forwarded the post to my lawyer. Add defamation to the list. That afternoon, I visited the bakery unannounced. The "Gone to Lunch" sign had been up for 3 days, according to neighboring businesses. Inside, through the windows, I could see unswept floors and empty display cases. A pile of mail sat untouched by the door. "She hasn't been in much lately," the owner of the neighboring coffee shop told me. "But we see her car at the country club all the time. Guess that's where she does her business meetings." And I thought about all the times Aunt Margaret had talked about her networking events and client meetings. How many of those had really been social outings, paid for with business funds, with my co-signed loan? My phone rang, Aunt Margaret's number. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message. Emily, darling, I hear you've been talking to lawyers. That's not very family-oriented of you. I'm sure we can work this out between us. Why don't you come over for dinner? I'm making your favorite chocolate cake. Remember how you used to love helping me bake when you were little? Her voice was sweet, cajoling, the same tone she'd used to convince me to co-sign the loan. But now I could hear the manipulation behind the warmth, the calculation behind the nostalgia. I texted back a single message. All communication needs to go through my lawyer from now on. Then I blocked her number. The demand letter hit Aunt Margaret like a bomb. Within hours, the entire family was in chaos. My mother called in tears, begging me to reconsider. My cousins bombarded me with texts, some angry, some concerned. Even my grandmother got involved, though she surprised everyone by taking my side. Margaret's been getting away with this behavior for too long, she said during our weekly lunch. Remember that time she borrowed my wedding ring for a photo shoot and pawned it instead? The family covered that up too. I hadn't known about the ring, or about the maxed-out credit cards in my uncle's name that my grandmother mentioned next, or about the borrowed car she'd sold without permission. Each story revealed a pattern I'd been too blind to see. The next day, Aunt Margaret launched her counterattack. She sent a mass email to the entire family, including distant relatives and family friends. In it, she painted herself as the victim of my corporate greed and lack of family loyalty. I only wanted to share my mother's recipes with the world, she wrote. Emily pressured me into taking out that huge loan, insisting we needed the most expensive equipment and the fanciest location. Now she's threatening me with lawyers because the economy is a bit slow. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, then sent my own reply all with bank statements attached. $3,000 at a luxury spa resort, $2,500 at designer boutiques, $5,000 for a business retreat that was actually a vacation in Miami. Dozens of restaurant charges at places nowhere near the bakery. Monthly country club dues. This is how Aunt Margaret spent the business loan, I wrote. Not on equipment, not on ingredients, not on my grandmother's recipes. Check the dates. All while she was missing loan payments and telling suppliers she couldn't pay them. The response was immediate. Some relatives doubled down on supporting Aunt Margaret, claiming I was airing dirty laundry. But others started reaching out privately, sharing their own stories of her financial manipulations. She borrowed $10,000 from me last year, one cousin wrote. Said it was for bakery supplies. I had no idea you'd co-signed a loan. She told me the banks were fully funding it. She tried to get me to co-sign first, another relative admitted. I said no, and she told everyone I was jealous of her success. My lawyer called that afternoon. Your aunt's lawyer reached out. They want to discuss a settlement. She has a lawyer? Her third one, apparently. The other two dropped her when they saw the financial records. The settlement meeting was set for a local coffee shop, neutral territory. Aunt Margaret arrived late, of course, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than the bakery's monthly rent. Her lawyer looked tired before we even started. Here's our proposal, my lawyer began. Ms. Emily will agree not to press criminal charges for the credit card fraud if Mrs. Margaret agrees to the following conditions. First, she'll sign a confession of judgment for the full amount of misused funds. Second, she'll make a public statement correcting her false allegations. Third, she'll surrender the bakery's assets to help repay the loan. Aunt Margaret's perfectly lined eyes widened. Criminal charges? But it was my business. I had the right to spend business loan money on personal luxuries? No, you didn't, her lawyer cut in. Mrs. Margaret, as I explained before, that's fraud. But Emily agreed to help me. She knew I needed... I agreed to co-sign a business loan, I interrupted. Not to fund your shopping sprees and spa days. Her face crumpled into familiar tears. I'd seen this performance before, at family gatherings, when bills came due, when she needed favors. But this time it didn't move me. I'll lose everything, she sobbed. The bakery was my dream. The bakery was your excuse, I corrected. Your dream was spending money you didn't have, and I'm done financing it. Her lawyer pushed a tissue box toward her. Mrs. Margaret, I strongly advise you to accept this offer. The alternative would be significantly worse. Worse than being betrayed by my own niece? She glared at me through her tears. Worse than federal charges for bank fraud, my lawyer replied calmly. Ms. Emily has documentation of every misused dollar, every personal purchase disguised as a business expense, every bounced check, every missed payment. Do you really want that presented in court? The tears stopped abruptly. Aunt Margaret's face shifted from wounded victim to calculated assessment. I recognized that look. She was weighing her options, just like she had when she'd first decided to target me for the co-signing. I'll need time to consider. You have until tomorrow, my lawyer said. After that, we proceed with criminal charges. As we left the coffee shop, I heard Aunt Margaret on the phone with my mother, already spinning a new version of events. But this time, her words couldn't touch me. I had evidence, I had truth, and most importantly, I had finally found my backbone. Aunt Margaret signed the settlement agreement the next day. Her lawyer practically pushed her hand to the paper, knowing it was her best option. Within a week, she posted the required public statement on social media, though she managed to make even her confession sound like martyrdom. Due to recent misunderstandings, I need to correct some statements about my niece Emily's involvement in the bakery. She did not pressure me into taking the loan, and any suggestions otherwise were incorrect. Additionally, I acknowledge that certain business funds were misused for personal expenses. The family reaction was split. Some relatives finally saw through her act, especially after more stories of her financial manipulations came to light. Others chose to believe her new narrative, that she was being noble by taking responsibility, that she was sacrificing herself to protect family peace. My mother struggled the most. She kept trying to find middle ground where none existed. Couldn't you have handled it more quietly? She asked during our weekly lunch. The whole town is talking. The whole town was already talking, Mom. Aunt Margaret made sure of that when she spread lies about me. She's still your aunt, and she's having such a hard time now. She had to cancel her country club membership. I pulled out my phone and showed her the latest credit card statement Aunt Margaret had tried to hide. Look at these charges, Mom. All while she was missing loan payments that affected my credit score. All while she was telling everyone I forced her into debt. My mother studied the statement, her face falling as she scrolled through the expenses. I had no idea it was this bad. No one did. That's how she operates. She counts on family loyalty to cover her tracks. The bakery's assets were sold to cover part of the debt. It wasn't much. Most of the equipment was leased, and suppliers had already reclaimed a lot of their stock. But it was something. Aunt Margaret would be paying me back for years, with the confession of judgment hanging over her head to ensure compliance. The hardest part was dealing with the flying monkeys, relatives and family friends who kept trying to make me feel guilty about destroying Aunt Margaret's dream. They didn't want to hear about the fraud or the misused funds. They just saw a niece who had turned against her aunt. But others started coming forward with their own stories. My cousin Tom revealed how Aunt Margaret had borrowed his inheritance money, promising to double it with investments that never materialized. My uncle confessed she'd taken out credit cards in his name during their marriage. Even my grandmother admitted there were more missing pieces of jewelry than just the wedding ring. You're the first one to stand up to her properly, my grandmother said. The first one to make her face consequences. Nope. My lawyer called with updates about the repayment schedule. Your aunt tried to negotiate lower monthly payments, she said. Claimed she couldn't afford the agreed amount. Let me guess. While wearing designer clothes and carrying a new handbag? Exactly. Don't worry, we shut that down fast. The confession of judgment means we can seize assets if she defaults. 6 months later, the bakery space had been taken over by a young couple who actually knew how to run a business. They kept some of grandmother's recipes on the menu as a courtesy, though they politely declined when Aunt Margaret tried to insert herself as a consultant. The family dynamics had shifted permanently. Holiday gatherings were smaller now, with clear divisions between those who understood my actions and those who still supported Aunt Margaret. My mother finally stopped trying to broker peace when she discovered Aunt Margaret had been borrowing money from her friends, using my mother's name as a reference. She told them I'd guarantee the loans, my mother said, shocked. If you hadn't exposed her pattern, I might have felt obligated to cover those debts too. The repayments were steady, if not graceful. Each month, Aunt Margaret made a show of how difficult it was to send the money, posting cryptic social media messages about sacrifices and family obligations. But her designer outfits and luxury car told a different story. She'd simply found new sources to fund her lifestyle. My cousin Sarah kept me updated on Aunt Margaret's latest schemes. She'd started a life coaching business, targeting wealthy divorcees with promises of financial freedom and entrepreneurial success. The irony was almost too much. Should we warn them? Sarah asked. They can Google her name, I replied. The articles about the bakery fraud are still online. If they choose not to do their research, that's on them. My own life had improved surprisingly. Without the stress of covering for Aunt Margaret's mismanagement, my work performance soared. I made partner at my accounting firm, specializing in fraud prevention. Sometimes I used my own experience as a cautionary tale for clients. Blood ties don't make someone trustworthy, I'd tell them. Sometimes they make us ignore red flags we'd never accept from strangers. The family friend network slowly rebuilt itself along new lines. Those who'd enabled Aunt Margaret's behavior for years found themselves excluded from social circles that had grown tired of being hit up for loans and investment opportunities. Meanwhile, I developed closer relationships with relatives who appreciated honesty and responsibility. My grandmother hosted a small dinner party to celebrate my promotion. Looking around the table at the family members who'd stood by me, I realized something important. Family loyalty shouldn't require self-sacrifice. Real family supports growth and responsibility, not endless enabling of bad behavior. I wish I'd had your courage years ago, my grandmother said, squeezing my hand. Think of all the heartache we could have avoided if someone had stood up to Margaret sooner. A year after the settlement, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a worn leather-bound notebook, my grandmother's original recipe book that had gone missing from the bakery. An anonymous note said it had been rescued before Aunt Margaret could sell it. The recipes brought back memories of childhood baking sessions, before I understood about manipulation and financial fraud. Back when Aunt Margaret was just my fun, creative aunt, who let me lick the spoons and didn't worry about measuring cups. My mother called that evening with news. Aunt Margaret was moving across the country. She'd found a wonderful opportunity in California, though nobody quite knew what it was. The family's reaction was telling. Instead of the usual excitement about her latest venture, there was only quiet relief. She asked to borrow money for the move, my mother admitted. For the first time in my life, I said no. It felt strange, but good. I ran my fingers over my grandmother's handwritten recipes, thinking about inheritance and legacy. Aunt Margaret had always claimed she wanted to honor our family's baking tradition, but real honor isn't about grand gestures and borrowed money. It's about respect, responsibility, and truth. The notebook now sits on my kitchen shelf. Sometimes I bake from it, measuring carefully, following the instructions exactly. There's something satisfying about doing things the right way, even if it's not as flashy as Aunt Margaret's dreams. It's a reminder that some things, trust, reputation, family bonds, have to be earned properly, not bought with borrowed money and broken promises. During the holidays that year, our smaller family gathering felt more authentic than the grand parties of the past. My mother baked cookies using grandmother's recipe book, measuring each ingredient precisely, a small but significant change from Aunt Margaret's creative approach to following instructions. Word from California trickled back through the family grapevine. Aunt Margaret had already launched and abandoned 2 new business ventures, but her posts still showed shopping sprees and luxury hotels. Some relatives still sent her money, despite everything they'd learned. Old habits die hard, I suppose, but the important things had changed. My mother now called me for financial advice instead of guilt trips. My grandmother had finally stopped trying to fix family conflicts and started enforcing boundaries. Even my cousins had begun questioning the family pattern of enabling bad behavior under the guise of loyalty. One evening, going through old photos, I found a picture from the bakery's opening day. Aunt Margaret beaming at the camera, me standing beside her, both of us full of hope for what the business could become. The photo should have made me sad, but instead I felt strangely grateful. That failed bakery had taught me priceless lessons about trust, boundaries, and the true meaning of family loyalty. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is hold them accountable. Sometimes the strongest relationships are forged not by blind support, but by honest confrontation. I put the photo away, but not before noticing something I'd missed before. Even then, on day one, Aunt Margaret had been wearing a designer watch she couldn't afford. Some people never change, but that doesn't mean we have to enable them.